Football made simple. Become great at your craft by finding ways to make it simple for those around you. This is the Coaching 101 podcast hosted by Find a Way Productions with your co-host Daniel Chamberlain and Kenny Simpson. What's up, coaches? This is the Coaching 101 podcast. I'm Daniel Chamberlain here with Kenny Simpson. Coach, happy Easter.
Yeah, it's been a good one. You know, these holidays are fun, and that's a pretty cool deal to kind of reset your focus a little bit. You know, we are unashamed Christians, and so there's a big holiday, for that. And
Absolutely.
I think even those who are not can recognize it's a pretty important impact.
For sure. Yeah, I've struggled in my religion since I joined the military and went to college, and I've recently just kind of been refining it. So this was a perfectly placed holiday for me because my wife lost a grandmother last Christmas, and she vowed to take the kids to church, and I don't want to be that roadblock.
Right.
So it was a really good holiday for us. We needed it. Good family, good religious holidays.
Well, it's one of the few. It's starting to get that way. But it's one of the few uncommercialized holidays. You know, Christmas is
Right.
buy gifts and crazy, and all the other ones. And Easter kind of seems to still be somewhat with your family and with your church if that's where you go, and kind of a more relaxed type holiday.
For sure. So I know this is a week late, so they're all going, it ain't Easter Sunday. We know,
Right,
but
right.
we record on Sundays, so happy Easter 1 week ago, I suppose. But, we have had a bunch of requests. You were telling me about some, and honestly, I've been getting requests for all kind of stuff. It's pretty fun to see what other guys want to hear for the episodes, but, some coaching situations. So what we're going to talk about this afternoon is just, exactly that. What are some sticky situations that you may even call them career defining, right? Because you get fired from some jobs for the wrong reasons, and that could be your career, at least as a head coach. And if you do it as an assistant, you may never get a head coaching job. So you got to be careful about some situations. Some are a little stickier than others.
Yeah, and I'll put a caveat on this. We're not the experts here. I'm going to go in. I'm going to be very candid, and kind of tell you maybe both sides what you need to think about, but what you decide a lot of times in these is what's defined by what your belief system is. And so to me, I think you got to define that on the front end, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in the episode, but don't feel like, Coach Simpson said did this, so I'm going to do this. And, you need to do what you think is right, but we're going to try to go through the situations no one tells you about when you become a head coach, and then, man, you're in it. And I'll try to give, with keeping as many innocent people out, some real life kind of applications. And then I'm sure Daniel will too. We want to make sure we're giving you actual stuff you can use.
Yes. Yep. Everything Coach said. None of this is end all be all, but you do have to take into account that Coach Simpson is a guy that's, how many years is this? 20? You've told me before.
I've been coaching football for 20 years. I've been a head coach for 15 of that, so it's been a bit.
So, what's the old saying? If you find an old man in a young man's game, like, you better listen to them because they figured out how to stick around so long.
Or they screwed up, and a lot of these you're going to hear tonight are screw ups, and then hopefully fixes. That's that first book I wrote, the one up behind me. If you're watching the screen up there, where it goes through. A lot of these I had to learn the hard way. And hopefully tonight we can kind of maybe give some advice to steer you out of some of that.
Absolutely. Before we get started, real quick, Coach, why don't you tell us a way we can simplify football for our staff and our players? This episode is brought to you by Athletic Speed and Movement. At athleticspeedmovement.com, we've taken Del Basquet's 45 years of speed and movement training and put it all in one place just for you. You can get the same training that NFL players have been getting for years, collegiate players have been getting for years, and now high schools across the nation are paying thousands of dollars to bring Dell in to install his system, but we've got it online for you. It's time to help your team become faster, not just in the 40, not just their sprint speed, but between the tackles and their cuts while they're chasing down the quarterback. It's time for you to help them become faster everywhere. Jump over to athleticspeedmovement.com. There's an orange button there. Just click it. It says, get the keys to playing faster. You'll get the 3 core movement video from Dell. He's explaining the science behind it, all for just the price of your email. Check it out, athleticspeedmovement.com.
Coaching 101 podcast is sponsored by Findaway Productions. Findaway Productions also sponsors fbcoachsimpson.com for all your coaching needs with over 30 coaching materials, books, as well as 50 PowerPoints and videos and smaller materials and the free magazine headsets. Findaway Productions also sponsors offensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things offense, and defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things defense.
Coach, do you want to communicate like a pro and experience the best sideline communication system on the market? Then let me introduce you to Procom headsets. Procom is the most clear, durable, and reliable system on the market. From our noise canceling technology to our coach to player communications featuring our patented loudmouth, Procom defeats the competition. Thousands of coaches have made the switch because they have seen, heard, and felt the difference. Let me show you how Procom headsets will make your game day communications a seamless and efficient process. Go to procomwelchman.com and reach out to me. That's PROCOMWELCHMAN.com.
What's up, coaches? I want to talk to you for just a few moments about your program. The longer I'm in this profession, the more I understand that efficiency is truly the name of the game. We're talking offense, defense, doesn't matter, right? Eventually, you're going to come down to checking out your efficiency. So I have to ask you, are you doing everything in your program the most efficient way, right? Are you fundraising the most efficient way? Are you representing your players and your program to the public in the best way? Are you planning to build the facilities the most efficient way? If you answered no to any of those, or really even if you answered yes to all of them, and you haven't contacted Mark Bridges at Ace Sports, you're missing a key step. So look, Mark and his team, they are the go-to group for video board and scoreboard installations for your school. They're not just football either. Mark can help you mock up your newest video board for that new stadium, or maybe even your old stadium, right? That's where Mark and the guys come in. And we're not just buying a flashy thing, right? Yes, it's nice. It's pretty neat to have that big scoreboard, that big video board, but you're also, you're investing back into that program. You're investing into that newest fundraiser. Sure, you can keep selling your discount cards, your beef jerky, hosting pie auctions, whatever it is that you like to do. But let's just be honest with ourselves, guys. We're not making enough money for those big ticket items. For the big ticket items like turf, an indoor facility, that's where you need a big ticket item fundraiser. That's what Ace Sports is offering you today. Guys, I've talked to Mark several times now, right? And it always comes down to big school, small school. Right? Well, of course, the big schools can afford that new video board, but the small schools really can't. It's just not true anymore, man. Your school isn't too small, and I promise. Okay, 1A, 2A schools, it doesn't matter. Mark and the guys, they're helping them out. Contact Mark today at mark.bridges@acesports.com and let him come give you a quote. Let him show you and your administration the plan. Now, really, it's the cheat code, right? Let him show you the cheat code that is fundraising with Ace Sports video boards. Tell him Daniel sent you. Awesome, Coach. Appreciate that. You guys, as always, reach out to those cats. Zach and Mark. Ryan Hughes, I'm going to screw up his last name. He's the Oklahoma area rep for the Ace Sports. So if you're somebody that's local to me, you want to reach out to Ryan, but Mark can get you there. So hit those guys up. Coach uses all these things, right? Everything that's an advertisement on this podcast so far, Coach Simpson has used, and I have befriended those guys and love their products. So I'm preaching their gospel all the time too. Coach's cap still out there, still doing the thing.
It is, it's getting that point. If you get spring football coming up, and again, I want to give the here. If you want to buy my hat, that's great because I like to sell products. But if you don't want to buy mine, go get something that's going to protect you from the sun. So, with the Coach's Cap, it's coachescap.com. It's got the UV protected bucket hat as well as the Fox 40 whistle attached to it. And you're going to get a better price there than you're going to get anywhere else. And so I think we've got a couple hundred left. We started off with a lot. We're down to about the last 100 or so before I got to make another order. So if you want to get in, it's coachescap.com. Then we also have Offensive Line Academy be coming out at the end of this month. So we're finishing up some recordings in that. If you're an offensive line coach or a guy that wants to learn that part of the game, I think that's probably the hardest part of the game for a lot of coaches that look like me and Daniel that maybe didn't play a lot of O-line to learn. You really have to learn from those guys. So we're putting out a really good academy that'll be out the end of this month.
Awesome. In any of those products, man, those products are always great. I love seeing them every time I come to the clinics, just seeing all the new stuff you've put out. So you guys, they really are kind of like all-inclusive product. You get everything you could possibly need and maybe more. So
yeah, and here's a free one because since we're talking about stuff you got to spend money on. Behind me, if you're watching, headsets has just come out at this point, I hope, because Jamie's putting it together today, and this comes out in a week. So headsets, it's all free. Just go to fbcoachsimpson.com/ headsets. We have 4 years worth of free material. Daniel's doing a great kind of series for us this time. We got 3 years worth of stuff. And so anything you can think of in football, you can find over there, and it's 100% free.
Yeah. Awesome. And I've had a blast doing it too. Talk about just getting to put what you think on paper and put it out there to the world and let other people kind of critique it if they want to or take it and use it. It's a pretty neat deal. So, well, Coach, we'll jump into the questions here. So, just first and foremost, what does it take to be a head coach? So, what are those things that you've had to deal with? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference in jumping from being a coordinator or an assistant coach to being a head coach is a couple really different things. One is you go from working from kids to adults, and so a lot of people are really good with kids, but adults are different. They're a little more complicated at times, and so go from where your sole focus for the most part is motivating kids and disciplining kids and working with kids, and that's the funnest part of the job. That's why we all signed up to be a coach. That's what we wanted to do. When
Right.
you become the head coach, you are now dealing with adults as far as their parents, and you're dealing with adults as far as your assistant coaches. And a lot of us didn't really sign up for that part of the job. Like we didn't really sign up to have to tell other adults what to do or have to deal with other adults' issues. And so that's a huge change. And a lot of the questions Daniel's going to kind of go through tonight relate back to that. They go back to dealing with parents. Very few are dealing with kids because the assumption I have is if you've made the jump from assistant to head coach, you're probably already pretty good with kids. Like that's probably how you had that opportunity come up. But when you go from kids to adults, the game really changes. And a lot of times it's not in a fun way. So you got to kind of be careful on that. We'll walk through a couple of those. And the second one, really in line with that, is the ability to make difficult decisions. If you are not a guy who, and I'm not saying you have to enjoy making hard decisions, you don't have to enjoy conflict. Like, I think it's kind of weird to people that do enjoy conflict. Like, I think most people inherently would prefer to avoid it. I
Right.
think that's just an inherent deal. How we deal with that is different. But if you're a head coach, it's coming. So you're going to have to make some hard decisions where you're going to make somebody you care about mad at you. And so kind of get ready, because if that's an area of your life you don't really enjoy and you avoid at all costs, being a head coach may not be the career path for you, because you're going to have those almost daily. Almost daily. Like when you walk in a room, it's going to get quiet. And if you're uncomfortable with that, that can be tough, because when you have to make some hard choices, there's going to be consequences that come from that. And so that's issue number two, I think you work with. Third one is you got to be able to handle you got diversity. And diversity comes in many shapes. It could come in ethnic groups, which is what we mostly think of. It can come in poverty lines, dealing with kids that are driving a vehicle that's nicer than you'll ever be able to afford, to dealing with the kid on food stamps. You got to be able to motivate both of those kids. You got to be able to motivate the kid whose parents are both doctors and is a 4.0, and motivate the kid who you're just trying to drag through school and get him to graduate. You have to be able to reach both of those types of kids, potentially different ethnic type groups of kids, also potentially kids that might not even like each other. You have to have the ability to reach all of them. So being able to handle those can be difficult, and be able to reach all of them can be really difficult. And the last thing I'd say on here, just kind of our first intro part here, is I think coaches that are great are able to see talent in other people, and they're able to use that talent to help the program. Like that could be an assistant coach. You recognize this assistant coach maybe has a great ability to do whatever that might be. And you're going to teach that guy, here's kind of our framework of what we believe in. And now you're going to give him this area of your program. That could be the weight room. That could be fundraising. That could be helping you work with certain groups of kids. That could be grades. That could be helping kids get recruited. I mean, there's so many different parts of being a head coach, especially today in football, that you need guys that are talented. And so you have to be able to see a coach's potential and do that. And then you got to do it with your players. See the potential leaders on your team and figure out ways to harness them. I think a lot of times what coaches do is we get there and we want to pick our captains, and we pick the 4.0 kid that we love because he shows up to everything. And then we wonder why nobody wants to follow that kid, because there's different leaders. And you as a coach have got to be able to recognize which kids have that ability, which kids are going to be your leaders one way or another. And then you as a coach have to be able to reach that kid. Because if you can't reach your leader, he's going to lead them the wrong direction. And so you've got to make and then it goes back to those hard decisions. If you get to the point where you can't reach him and he's a leader, now you got a really tough decision of how you're going to handle that stuff. So I think those are the biggest parts of being a coach is one, dealing with adults, two, making hard decisions, recognizing the talent of those around you, and then being able to kind of hit all areas of people because you can't just coach the kids you like. It doesn't work that way. So those are to me, when you're thinking about making the jump from assistant to head coach, you need to seriously evaluate yourself on all of those things. And if you feel like, okay, you're never going to be perfect, but if you feel like, okay, I'm willing to at least do these things, now you're at least at part one. Now you're ready to start the journey, and it's a long journey.
Yeah, on the job training is real because you're gonna run into we won't even talk about all the situations you could possibly face tonight, right? Like there's just too many things out there. Um, I was on a call with someone last night, and they said, we were a DC and I'm sorry, an OC, and their starting quarterback decided on like after 1 week or something, or after the first scrimmage, that he was going to be the getaway driver in a robbery. Like what? Like, so, I mean, there's 1,000 things that you're never going to think of. It's just going to happen to you. So, what I hope to add to tonight's episode, obviously, I've never been a head coach. I thought this was the year. I missed out a little bit, but it was best for me. I landed in a good place, I believe. So, just want to kind of add where I've seen this stuff from assistant coach. And once again, a lot of times the answer should be refer it to the head coach, right? You start dealing with something that has the word situation before it. They get paid the big bucks for that. But I do think there's places that you can be ready to provide answers, to assist that guy. I'm a big take things off the head coach's plate guy. So, I've legitimately asked my coach that, what can I take off your plate? I see you're busy, overwhelmed. What can I do? And I mean it. And so I think some of these things, you can help out as much as possible, but understand you're speaking for the whole program when that happens. And so you have to be really squared away because you could get your head coach fired, which is not the place you want to be. So we'll just jump right into it, Coach. Number one, let's just go with, you talked about making hard decisions. So how do we make hard decisions?
I mean, I think everybody's different. I think everybody kind of has to go through whatever their process is. So I can't tell you, here's what you need to do, but I can give you some general tips. One is take more time than you think you probably need to, especially if you're a guy like me. Like you don't want to make a decision that's a big, hard decision in the emotion of the moment. Like here's an example. Some kid at practice just goes nuts and you can feel the vein coming in your neck. That is not the time to deal with what that kid's consequence is. You need to remove him from the situation, get him off the field, send him home, do whatever. That's probably not the time to decide on what your decision's going to be, because you're probably going to come down way too hard. And then you're either going to have to back off of that and look weak, or uphold maybe an unfair punishment that you delivered because you were angry. So first thing I would say is you want to make sure that you try to take emotion out of those decisions. Second thing is you need to see things from everybody's side. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you should only do what the admin wants you to do, but you need to recognize the consequences of what that's going to happen. You need to see how they see things. So let me give you how most admin think. And I'm not trying to insult admin. I've known a lot of them. I work with a lot of them, some great ones. They think, what's going to get us sued? That's the first and only thing they think in any situation. So when you're in the situations, you need to think like they're going to think. So something happened, their first thought is what's going to get us sued or in trouble. Liability. That's the big word you're going to hear from all admin. So you need to understand what that's going to look like from their end. Then you need to think from the parents' end. The parents' end on 99% of the case is my child is never wrong. So go ahead and kind of put that in there and understand that's what you're going to be walking into. Finally, you got to see the situation from the athlete's side. I would hate to be judged by the decisions I made when I was 16, 17, and 18 years old for the rest of my life. Like I made some really poor choices. So we got to kind of remember some of the really dumb things we did when we were that age. And so you've got all of that going on, and you got to kind of make a decision based off of what's best for our program. And so the second thing I would say is you need to lay down what is your golden rule as far as coaching. For me, it's always athletes first. Like the athlete's interest is number one in every decision that we make. That doesn't mean we're going to just let them do whatever. Like you're not helping kids by enabling them. I'm not suggesting to do that. But our number one concern is our team, our collective group of athletes. Our number two concern is the individual athlete. So when you get into really hard decisions, you look at, okay, for our team, for me, with these other 60, 70, however many kids you have on the roster, what's the best decision for all of them? Then you look at the individual athlete. What's the best decision for this athlete who did whatever it is that got you into this situation, probably. Then we think about our coaches. I think about my coaches third, and then I think about my administration fourth. The parents are near the bottom. You got to be smart on that, but you got to think about the kid, because if you're doing what's best for the kid, you're going to hope that you can show the parent what you're trying to accomplish. It doesn't mean you're never going to make them all happy, but at least if you can say, here's why we did what we did, the decision we made, and kind of how we move. So take your time, have kind of a golden rule of how you want to do things. And then the final thing I would say, and there's more you could have here, but would be to have some kind of sounding board. And that needs to be somebody you trust. That could possibly, you could be careful in this world, it could possibly be a coach on your staff. But you better be extremely, extremely careful if that's the route you take, because that guy, you need to have full trust in them. And I would
Yeah.
be very careful in that world to have full trust in anybody unless you've been with them for 10, 15, 20 years, what they're made of. Because a lot of times what you put out there, you don't need to get down to everybody. That could be your spouse. It could be your spouse. It could be something you go home to and you have the ability to share that with your spouse. My mind is great in that world. That could be a parent. That could be another former coach. That could be whoever that is. But you need some kind of sounding board there, because sometimes you need help seeing through what you can't see. A lot of times decisions that need to be made, you're looking at it from different perspectives, but really you can't. Like I can't see things from a different perspective. So I need somebody who I can talk to who's going to be willing to at least challenge my decision. Who's going to be at least willing to say, well, have you considered X, Y, or Z? And so those are the three things I would say. Take your time, have your golden rule of how you want to order things, and then finally have a sounding board. And even with all of that, it's still going to be a tough decision. And some of the ones we're going to talk about tonight are really tough decisions.
Right. So, we'll just jump right in this next question. I don't really have anything to add to how to make hard decisions. I'm big on pros and cons and make a list, right? And you said it best, seeing things from everyone's side. Sometimes I get caught up in that almost too much. Like you can get stalled, right? You can get bogged down trying to make everyone happy. But I agree that golden rule or athletes first, whatever it is that you want to put in place there, as long as I can back up whatever it is I chose, and I'm proud of that decision, then I'm good with it.
Yeah.
What circumstances come is what comes, right? Like you're going to make mistakes. No one's going to be perfect. Just do what you believe is the best possible route, and then live with the consequences. If you're out for yourself and just trying to worry about yourself, then you're going to pay those consequences by a team that doesn't want to play for you. If you're out there for the kids, then there might be some parents, some admin mad with you, but it's hard for anyone to be mad at you when you can come through and say, I did what was best for the kids, period.
Right.
So,
and I think that whatever that rule is for you, you lay that out in your parent meeting, you lay that out during your interview, you lay that out during a lot of things. And I would caution you, if that's not the school you're going to's motto, they don't match. Like if yours doesn't match theirs, I'm not telling you what it needs to be. Mine's always been the kids first, but yours might be something different. Yours might be whatever it is. You're not wrong or right with whatever you think, but mine's always been kids are first. And if the school doesn't match that, the interview's over. Like at this point, it's not going to end well. I mean, I could take that job, but I'm not going to change their culture. Like you're not going to go in as a football coach and change the culture of the admin. It doesn't happen that way. He'll get fired or you'll get fired. That's how that goes. So you need to be real careful with that. And then you need to make sure you lay it out with your parents. And then here's the harder one. You got to lay that out with your coaches, because you're going to say there's times where you're going to do things you don't want to do because we're doing things to help our kids, which means you may be giving up your weekends to do retreats and different things that you'd prefer not to do, because who's first in our program? Our kids are. And so there's times when that can cause conflict within your staff, but it needs to be
Right.
laid out and you hire guys based off of the same thing.
Yep. Awesome. Next question here. How do you, and we're going to get right into the kids. This one less hard of a decision, but it's just kind of a bad situation to be in. How do you deal with years that you're a talent deficiency? So
Yeah,
you
this
just
is not,
don't have,
yeah.
you don't have the Jimmys and Joes, right?
Yeah, and this is, I mean, half the guys that listen to the podcast are in this. If you coach football, half the teams win and half lose. And generally,
Right.
not all the time, generally talent is probably 80% of who wins and who loses. I mean, there's some scheme, cultural stuff, but really, if he's got a bunch of D1s and you don't, it's going to be hard to win that game. So just understand that, like, we're just going to talk about you're going into a season knowing that maybe 8 of the 10 games or more, you're going to have a hard time winning. It doesn't mean you can't win. It just means you're going to have a hard time. So I think a few things you got to do on that is you got to set realistic expectations. I think that's with you, your staff, and your kids. I'm not a big fan of like limiting their potential. We don't ever talk about how many wins. We don't say that kind of stuff. We say things along the lines of how are we going to beat teams that are faster, stronger, and quicker than us? Because that's facts. Like I can go there and say this team has 5 kids that run a 4.5 and we have 2. Well, they're faster than we are. These kids outweigh us by 100 pounds across the line. They're bigger than we are. These kids have won a state championship. They have more talent than we do. Those are facts. You're not telling your kids you can't win. You're telling them the reality of the situation. And so I think that you need to understand, if that's the case, your kids need to know what we're walking into. Like, don't hide them from it. Don't lie to them. I think you still need to lay out a plan of action of how you can be victorious in those games. But I think the kids need to know, hey, we played this team. You've heard that famous line, and is it a miracle? We played them 10 times, we might win one. You know what? But let's make tonight the one. Like, let's figure out a way to make that happen. So first thing is you got to have realistic expectations. Because of that, if you can do that first, then you need to set your scheme to match that. Like, well, your scheme needs to match that. Like, what are you going to do to be unorthodox? Because I'll tell you this, if your talent is deficient and you are a very ordinary running, and I just mean like you run a generic, ordinary type offense or defense, you didn't give them any advantage in the scheme world. So what is your scheme doing to maximize the talent that you do have? Are you doing something unorthodox to give your kids an opportunity? Like teams that run flex bone, they don't do it because they think it looks sexy. They do it because they think it gives their kids a chance to win games. Are you going to be a rush the passer kind of defense? We're just trying to create turnovers, and that's how we're going to overcome our deficiency. Or are we going to sit back in a soft shell and try to hope that these teams are going to hurt themselves? You got to kind of make those decisions within your scheme, but you owe it to your kids to organize a scheme that matches. Here's an example of that. Like, I think if you're running flex bone offense and draining the clock, and then you're sitting back in a soft shell on defense, you're going to shorten the game and give your kids a chance to win. Okay. Or if we're going to do it by throwing the ball a bunch. Like, that's how we want to win the game. So we're going to make our defense built to get quick stops and kind of speed the game up. Well, we think that gives us an opportunity. So there's lots of ways you can slice the pie there, but what is your scheme doing to kind of help in that world? And then the third thing is, how are you developing your kids for the future? Those are the years where a lot of times you're not going to be great this year. So let me explain how this is going to work. You can do all this stuff and go 0-10. You can do everything I just told you and go 0-10, and you still have to justify why you need to keep your job. So you need to figure out what program in which age group in your program that you're responsible for, you can kind of pour some investment into. The year we went 0-10 one year, had a bunch of sophomores. So we poured all of our effort into our JV group. Like our JV group, which was the same sophomores that were getting their butt kicked on Friday, they were playing on Mondays, and we went like 6-1. And then our junior high went like 7-2. So we as coaches, we're not going to neglect our varsity kids. We're going to give them all we have, but we're definitely going to pour more time into those other ones to kind of highlight, hey, look where our program is going. Here's our future. Here's our hope. Because you've got to be able to justify what happened, unfortunately, winning and losing to a board or to an administration or to a community or to your coaches or to your players. Your players, you're 0-10 and you have no success down below. It's hard to sell that. So you need to figure out kind of where you're going to be okay, put some effort into there, make sure that people know what's coming. Because you can look ahead. Most coaches, if you're at a program long enough, you can kind of look down and go, this is going to be a great year. This will be an okay year. This could be a really down year. This could be a great, you kind of can look down and see that. And so you want to make sure that you're putting time into the areas where you can be good. And then you're trying to figure out ways with those rough years, which we're talking about right now, where you can mitigate that. Maybe instead of going 0-10, you go 4-6. And so there's different ways you got to do that. But I think you have to be honest with your kids up front on that. I think you got to set your scheme and talent to match that. And I think you got to make sure that you are pouring your time into your lower grades on those years it's going to be rough.
Yep. If you're an assistant coach and you're in the situation where maybe it's just your position group doesn't have the talent, but you can't really poach anyone, I just say have answers. This is where competency as a coach comes in. Coach Simpson just talked about that, having the X's and O's that is a little unorthodox. Get in and study your position. Figure out ways that you can give a kid an advantage. Maybe it's Tozer at 4 instead of 5. Maybe he's slow. Maybe we know we need to blitz that kid a little more because he's just scared to get in the hole. I talk to D-line all the time. We talk about D-line and just you talk about being attacking, but our only effort is our guys are just going to get upfield and give up vertical seams. So, have the competency to coach them through those tough situations. Yes, that kid is going to whip my butt if I go head up with him every single time. What can I do as a player to get an advantage? And maybe that's part of your scheme. Maybe you're, talking to your head coach or your coordinator about, maybe do more twists and stunts and just get movement, right? So that getting back in that scheme. But also you need whatever talent, and I talk about competency, you need to know what you're talking about because whatever talent you do have, your kids are more likely to shine if their coach, if they have confidence in their coach, right? And your competence will build their confidence in you. If you're kind of the goofball on staff that never has answers and you're constantly having to ask the next guy over, how do I do? They're just going to quit playing for you. And whatever their talent level, you could even have great talent, but if you don't know what you're talking about, they're quickly going to be talking to the linebackers coach, like, can I come over there? They're going to want to get somewhere where they know the coach can help them get better. So have those answers. And the other thing is just don't be afraid to make a mistake. Do some moves, change some things up. I'm a 4-2-5 guy, and so even talking D-line again here, I'm a big proponent of putting little kids on the line. Like, use speed, change the speed of the game for those big boys up front who've been taught you're going to go against 220 pounds to 320 pounds. They're going to hit you in the face, and then you got to have a block. Well, what if they're not doing that? What if they're shooting gaps and just, I spent my entire college career, which was 1 year, on the scout team making D2 athletes, scholarship O linemen look stupid because I could just get around them being quick. So let your kids do the same thing, right? So it's once again going back to that word unorthodox. It's okay to go out and do things a little different. So if you're down on linebackers or you're down on linemen or whatever this year, don't be afraid to put another kid in there. Just let them change that pace of the game and do something a little bit different for you, and see if that doesn't help you with the talent. I'll tell you, my very first year of coaching, we had a middle linebacker that would not fill gaps, and we tried blitzing him. We tried everything we could. He's a pretty big boy. After about the first 6 games of the year, we just took our best 2 D linemen and put them both at inside linebacker, and no one ran the ball anymore on us. We played backup D linemen who were usually linebacker types. Mm-hmm. They worked speed, got away from double teams, and those 2 linebackers just filled gaps, and there was no more running the ball inside. Now, we weren't as good running sideline to sideline, right? And we still had some disadvantages, but we did the best with what we had. And sometimes that's all it takes is just being a little unorthodox. When your defensive tackles are your best inside linebackers, you're going to have to do things different no matter what. So we found it. Next question here, and I know what order they're in. I'm gonna jump ahead just to stay with the players part here. So we talked about talent being down, but what about when it's effort, coach? So what do we do when we have players that just won't give us the efforts that needed? We're constantly building that culture, and now we have kids that don't fit, almost cancerous. So what are we doing there?
Yeah, I mean that's what every coach wants to know is how do I get my players to maximize their effort? And that's and in good years we all everybody can. The Twitter answer is your best players are your hardest workers. Man, that's not true. Like 99% of the time, in my experience, usually your best players are kids that can have a tendency to be lazy because they've been really good and they're not really had to work a whole lot. And so most of the time your most talented kids are not your hardest workers. So how do you figure that out? And then how do you figure out kind of the like a you heard the rising tide carries all boats. How do you kind of get the effort level for the team to come up? So there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing this. And guys, there's not a perfect answer because every kid's different. What we try to do is identify like the alphas in our group, the guys that kind of lead the group and get them to buy into what we're doing. So instead of trying to get 70 kids to buy into what we're trying to do, now I only got to get like four kids to buy into here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. And those kids have to be, they can be approached differently. Some kids learn because they need to understand that you're trying to help them get better. I think Daniel hit the nail on the head there. If a kid feels like you can help them succeed, like you really can, they believe that you can, and you've shown them, whether that's through your knowledge or whether that's through other things, that you're going to help them become better at what they're trying to be better at. Which you need to start off with football, and then hopefully you can build that into deeper and more important things. But start off with football, that's what they're there for. If you can get those four guys to buy in, then a lot of times what I would do is have those kids kind of police a lot of the other ones. So that's option one. Option one is to try to get your team leaders, the real leaders, not the ones you want to be the leader, the real leaders on board with here's our expectation on effort, and I need you to help me with everybody else. Second thing you can do, and this sounds kind of odd, but is you can call in your kids that aren't giving great effort, and instead of reaming them out not giving great effort, ask them to help you with another kid who's not giving great effort. So a lot of times you can bring in a kid, he's not been really good at giving great effort, so maybe he's a junior. Say, hey, I've got so and so who's a sophomore, and we're trying to teach him how we do things here. So I'm going to need you to kind of help me teach him what we expect from him and how we're going to do things. And so kind of a two birds, one stone thing there. Like maybe you can get that kid helped and this other kid, oh, well, coach needs me to help him. Now I might possibly raise my level of effort. And so you kind of have gone about a different way of approaching it where you're not just blistering a kid. So that's options 1 and 2. We're going to try to live in those worlds. Like those are the worlds you want to live in when you're dealing with really anything with kids. If you can live in those two worlds and stay away from the discipline, and I don't mean discipline, stay away from punishment. That's a better word there. Stay away from punishment, then you're going to be pretty golden. Like if you can live in those two worlds 90% of the time, things will go relatively smooth in your program because the kids are kind of policing themselves. They recognize you see different things. You're giving them a chance to lead. Unfortunately, most of the time when the issues happen, it's that next part. So the next part has to become discipline. So now what am I going to do to a kid who's not going to give effort? And I'll tell you, if you really want to send the message, bench therapy is the only message I've ever seen that actually could work. You can yell, you can scream, you can holler, you can make a fool of yourself, or you can just remove them and sit them down. And that's your best tool as a coach, is to put them on the bench. That might be for a couple plays. That might be for a game. That might be for whatever it is. And so to me, that's the ultimate way you're going to try to correct behavior, that you really want to send a message and reach the kid and the other kids that are watching this situation because they see things, is you put them on the bench. And so those are really your major options. There are other options you can go about. I'm sure there's other motivational tactics you can do, but to me, those are really your only three options. You can basically try to get the captains or the leaders of the team to help. You can maybe convince that kid to help you. and then finally you can sit them on the bench. But other options you can do, I just don't see them being very effective. I've seen a lot of coaches who feel better about themselves because they've just berated a kid, and then you've kind of created another issue. You've gone from now this kid's issue was effort, and now I've made a huge deal about this, and now I've made it a bigger deal than it probably needed to be. So you've kind of taken
Yep.
a deal that was already not a great deal, and you made it worse, and you've kind of put the spotlight on that and how you're going to deal with that. I'm not a guy that says you avoid confrontation, but I am a guy that says sometimes it's best to handle things behind the scenes before it gets to that point. There will come a time as a coach, you'll be put on the spot and you have to do something right then, right there to keep the respect of your team, your coaches, everybody. You don't want that to be an everyday occurrence. Like you want that to
Yep.
be maybe once or twice a year, and you handle other things what's it before preemptive
Preemptively. Yep.
preemptively. You handle things preemptively. You get to them before they become a big issue. Is always the best way to go about that, and that's always the best way of effort. Final thing, I'll do a real quick plug here for Feed the Cats guys. Since we have gone to that kind of model, and we're not 100% that way, but the idea of we're not going to require you to do a 3-hour practice. We're not going to require you to do pointless conditioning. We've seen those specific issues drop dramatically because now when we are asking kids to go full speed, they understand there's a purpose and there's a point. So we're not perfect, but we've seen a lot of those issues kind of go away.
Yep. I want to be, being the extreme ownership guy. I need to meet Jocko Willink probably at some point. I would like to think I've sold a few of his books just
Good.
by talking about it all the
Yeah.
time. But um, I want you to look at yourself. So if you're facing this situation and you're an assistant coach, make sure that you are giving the effort, right? Are you dragging your feet on anything? Is it statistical? Are you getting your job done on the weekends? Are you showing up to practice on time, ready to go? I don't mean like I didn't forget my pen today or something stupid, but like you're in the building, right? You can't complain to a player who gets out of the locker room 5 minutes late, but you're doing the same thing. You're sitting there not ready to go. So in drills, do you know what you're talking about? Have you thought about today's practice? Or are you making it up as you go? Because kids are going to see that, right? And when you're like, oh, I've got 5 minutes here. I'm supposed to be doing a drill. I better create it real quick. They're going to sniff that out so fast. And so when you aren't giving the full effort for practice, which is a lot of the times behind closed doors before practice ever starts, they sniff that out. Why would they give you full effort, right? You kind of get what you earn there. Going on back to, we talked about players wanting to know if you can help them or not. I think everybody has heard like they don't care what you know until they know that you care, right? And that's been like the motto of the decade or so since I've been in coaching. But I think it's Joe that probably said it first that I've heard, and I doubt he made it up. But there's kind of a new motto, and it's not, and you'll find it to be more realistic. And it's not they don't know what you know until they know what you care. It's they don't care that you care until they know what you know, right? Does that make sense? Until they know you can help them, it doesn't matter if you're the most lovey-dovey, patting them on the back all the time. I got you, bro. No one cares unless you're going to get them somewhere or you're going to teach them something. If you're just a guy out there that's just the relationship dude and you're really good at it, but you don't have any football sense, it's great to have you on the team. Maybe you should be the guy that's leading prayer before the game or like motivational speeches before the game, but being someone's position coach, they might not be so excited about that. So they need to make sure that you can help them.
Yeah, my
And you
mind
talked
says,
about,
my mind
go
says
ahead.
using football as a tool. So, like what you're saying on there, Dan, you're like, I think it's important that we do teach these kids all these other important values. Like I know when I go speak people, I think people kind of maybe are shocked that I talked about being great at football like you just did right there. But like no kid is going to want to hear how I can help him with other areas of his life unless I prove I can help him in the area I've been hired to help him with. Like
Right.
if I can do a good job as his football coach, he may listen to me when it comes to advice about drugs or it comes to advice about college or whatever he's going to do after school. we sometimes as coaches, we want to put the cart before the horse. Like that's what we want to do. We all want to help kids. We all want to have those conversations to help them. But we got to be good at our job first. And
Yeah.
then we can have those conversations. It's important, but like you said, just because you are a good person doesn't mean you're a good coach. It doesn't work that way.
Last little bit here. You talked about therapy, bench therapy. That also doesn't work for everybody, right? Because it might be a freshman that's not starting. He may not even play a
Right.
single rep, but he's a turd. The best thing I ever heard was starters don't start, players don't play, suitors don't suit. So whatever level they're at in your team, they're just a role player. They come in every once in a while. Well, that's taken away from them. All they do is suit and stand on the sidelines. Now they're in the stands with mama, and they have to number one, they got to tell mama why they're not suiting,
Right.
and so that's gonna get home. But it takes whatever little thing they get from you on game night, and you take that away from them,
Yeah, well, I
right?
took
And
the
that,
job at Cersei, and that's kind of going on your point here. We had 70 some odd kids on our roster. It was right in during COVID, so you had a lot of craziness going on. They had struggled with discipline before I took the job, so you had kids that just they thought it was optional. So when 25 kids didn't dress for our first 3 games, they learned really quickly it was not optional. You needed to be there, and so that's what you mentioned. Suitors don't suit, players don't play, whatever that is. The message needs to be sent.
yep, perfect. We'll jump into the next question here. Let's talk parental issues because I think it ties so much to the players, and then we'll kind of jump back into the other order. But so how do you deal with parental issues of all kinds?
Well, first you got to know the situation. Like a lot of times we deal with a kid, we have no idea. So a kid walks in and does something crazy, and you kind of go, "My goodness, what in the world is going on here?" So you got to do some digging. You need to know, or an assistant needs to know. I know sometimes you might be dealing with 100 kids, but you need to know, or an assistant needs to know, or somebody needs to know what's the background on this kid, like what's going on here. Everybody's had those stories of, kids got no parents. We've got kids that are homeless that we're coaching, like they live on their own, and that's
Yeah.
crazy. So that kid, his standard and his conversations with me, he's got to be different. It doesn't have to be. We don't have to just let him do whatever he wants, but you got to know where that kid's coming from. Like I've got a kid on my team who's a father. There's those are different conversations, and there are different expectations, and there are different. Everything is different, and so I think as a coach, you have to know the background of what you're dealing with right there. Then there are really about 3 types of parents. There's the good parents, the ones that show up. And in my mind, if you show up, you're a good parent because unfortunately, that's where we are in society now. Like, are you trying to help your kid? Then you're a good parent. Even inside of that, those parents tend to be sometimes the hardest ones to deal with because they want what's best for their kid. Where I'm saying what's best for the team, what's best for the kid, they're flipping those two. Like what's best
Yeah.
for their kid specifically in their mind, and it might not even be right, but in their mind, then what's best for the team, then whatever else, and so you got to understand where they're coming from a lot of times because generally they're coming from a place of love. Like they are trying to come from a good place to help their kid. Unfortunately, sometimes their view of what love is and yours can be different. So those types of parents can be difficult, but you've got to be able to address those kind of parents and get on the front end of those because those are also probably going to be your booster club members. They're probably going to be your volunteers. They're probably going to be your picture takers. So they are probably going to be the ones that you're going to interact with the most simply because they're there. So those are the ones you want to try to start off with as many good relationship things on the front end as possible. Like what are some easy things you can do to form a decent relationship there? So when that time comes, because it will come, when that hard conversation has to be had, they will at least hopefully think this guy does have my kid's best interest at heart. It's not going to solve everything, but can we find some time with them where we don't talk about sports, we don't talk about whatever, we're just meeting and talking, or maybe we're doing like a mother-son date night. We do a lot of that kind of easy stuff, where our fathers come into locker rooms and do our decals. So what are some easy things to create a good relationship? Because those are the types of parents that They're really the backbone of your program. A lot of times, those are the ones that are picking up other kids. So these are usually good people that, unfortunately, I am a dad and a coach. So I'll give you a real life example. So my daughter, good athlete, all conference this year in volleyball, going to be all conference in soccer, all conference in bowling. I mean, and she was a pretty good little basketball player back in the day. I don't like watching her on the bench. I don't. I'm a coach. I understand. Like, I understand you play your best kids and you play to win. I get all of that stuff. I don't care. I want to see my daughter happy. And
The
so
kid
you
the
have to
best
kind of,
thing I ever heard you say was parents want to see the team play the best 10 plus their
that's
child, right, in
correct. Like,
football. They
it's
want their kid and the other best 10 kids possible.
right. And when I go watch basketball, I want them to play the best four kids and my daughter. Like, that's what I want them to play. But you have to step back. Now I'm a coach, because I can step back as a coach on that end and say, well, yada 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 yada, you know. But I know the emotion, so you got to know what their emotion is. It's not coming from a place that they hate you. It's going to come across that way, and you're going to catch a lot of the blame. And there are times where you're going to feel hated, but it's mainly coming from they're trying to protect their own kids. So that's parent number one. What's your plan for them? Like, what's your plan for them? Okay. Parent number two is the one that never shows up. Okay. And so we have two of these. You have the ones that never show up unless it's to argue with you. And those, in my opinion, are the most frustrating parents. Like, these are the ones that don't show up to anything. They don't bring their kids home. You're probably dropping their kid off. They don't show up to fundraisers. They don't have enough money to pay for whatever. So you got to help out the kid with the spirit pack. They're those parents, but they're the first ones in line to call the admin when something happened. So those are most frustrating parents you have. What's your plan for those parents? That's not a fun group of parents. As I've gotten older, I've gotten less patient with them, which is probably not a good thing, which is why I probably need to start slowly transitioning to another spot, because you're going to have patience with those kind of people. Those are the most frustrating group, and you're going to have a lot of those, unfortunately. Like, that's going to be, group number one. We just talked about all the frustration with them. Well, that's probably only about 10 to 20%, really. This group's probably about 50%. Like, this is the group that, the only time you're ever going to hear from them is when they don't even talk to you. They just go to the AD. So what's your plan for that? What's your plan with your admin and AD when someone comes to them? My plan is, don't talk to them, send them to me. And that happened because I got called into an admin meeting once with a parent, and I walked out of the room and said, I'm not meeting, because they haven't talked to me. That wasn't, my admin was not real happy with me, like, really not real happy with me. But we'd had that conversation. They want to go around this and you want to talk to a parent, talk to them. But I'm not talking to them with you. They can meet with me, and then we can progress it up. So what's your plan with your admin? And then flip that. What's your plan for when they come complain about Daniel working with the receiver kid? What's that plan? My plan is, have you talked to Daniel? If you haven't, don't talk to me. Go talk to him. Now, after you've had that conversation, then we can move up the chain. So what's your plan on both of those worlds? Finally, group three of parents is the neglectful ones. They're just not there ever. Like, they're never there. And so what are you doing with your kids that don't have any parental support at all, where you are dad? Like, you're the dad. How are you handling those? Because those are the ones, unfortunately, that are the most likely ones to get kicked off the team of any of the groups, because there's nothing there holding them to it. How are you handling that? Because that's some sleepless nights. You kick that kid off the team, you know where that's going. Like, that's not going to end in a good place for them. You know it's not going to. So how are you going to deal with that? Because those are where the really you want to make hard decisions. Kick a kid off the team that you know is probably not going to graduate. That's a hard decision. Right. And so how are you handling that? Like, what are your steps that led you to end up where you ended up? Because let's be honest, you can't save them all. You can't. But how many can you save without hurting the rest of them? And so that's kind of right. Those kids with no parents kind of fall into that bucket. So you have parents that are just annoying, but at least they love their kids, and they're going to give you issues because their kid didn't play because he sucks. Then you're going to have your normal-ish parent that you don't ever hear from them unless something went wrong. And then you're going to have the other extreme where there's just no parent at all. So those are things you got to think about when you're a head coach. And not only that, you got to know which kid falls into each bucket. Because I can tell you right now, I can watch a kid in sixth grade, not watch him play, but look at his family situation, and I know his odds of making it. If they're in group number one, their odds are about 80%. If they're in group number two, 50 to 70%. If they're in group number three, about 20%. That's kind of the odds of them finishing if they are playing sports at that age. And so you know that stuff on the front end. And that's also should dictate, unfortunately, how much time you're putting into these kids. Because if you got a group that's only 20% going to finish, you don't want to neglect them, but you better be putting time into the group that's more likely going to be there for you. The sixth grade all star is a good chance, unfortunately, he becomes the eighth grade dropout. And so you want to stop that if you can. But if you can't stop that, what's your plan for developing your team, knowing that kid may not make it?
Unfortunately, this is kind of that spot where it like really hits home because, the motto I live by, and like you, Kenny, I've become quite the quote person in my football career. But some kids need football more than football needs them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just talked about it. You just talked about the kid that if you kick him off the team, you know what his life ends up. Right now, he's into drugs and alcohol at a young age. Probably going to father a bunch of kids he can't pay for. Lives on the system, and all he needed was you to just keep him around long enough to get him through high school, get him to a trade school or college, whatever his route in life is, because no one else is there pushing him either. He has zero motivation. And that is, I mean, I just left a school that's unfortunately a majority of those kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we watched it happen, right? Like you watch, that's the kid that blows up on Friday, that makes you look stupid in public,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to put that ego aside and go, I know it ain't him. His parents, if they were there at all, were probably abusive to him. Probably tonight before he came to the game, he's got a bigger chip on his shoulder than this protecting that pigskin. His life is survivability, and then we worry about this game that I'm choosing to play,
Correct.
regardless of how talented he is. And unfortunately, it seems like those guys that grow up hard, they live for these contact sports,
Yeah.
right? Kind of that old, well, I remember the quote anyway. Just kids that grow up in hard situations become hard, and then they need a place to take it out. And the gridiron's a great place for them to exist, but it comes with a lot of side effects too, right? So keeping those kids, like I'm as of right now, you talked about golden rules, but I'm never going to kick a kid off the team. Now it may become unbearable for him to be there and not get to start, but have to practice and go through the long days. He may kick himself off, but I'm not going to kick him off, right?
Well, the hard part of those is not just the individual kid. It's I can look at kids on our team and go, if this kid stays on our team, he's going to drag four down with him. Like you can kind of, and that's when the decisions become harder. Because I'm with you, Daniel. I mean, we have at one point we've had to kick a couple off, but for the most part, we avoid that at all costs. Generally, it's
and never say never, right?
That's
You
what-
can't paint yourself into corners.
correct. Well, generally, when it happens, is not so much that the kid is a problem. I've been embarrassed plenty. I don't care about that. Is he going to pull four other kids that are on the borderline with him? Or could I cut this one out and maybe save these other three? So those are where those decisions become even tougher.
And this kind of ties back into that last question too, just talking about, well, actually all of them, talent deficiencies and effort, and now dealing with parents. But Kenny, there's not really normal. Normal doesn't exist. And so when you start talking about normal parents, well, this is what a normal interaction is supposed to be like. Well, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. You can't go into coaching with an idea that there is a common normal, and it doesn't matter if it's home life. A couple jobs ago, I'm dealing at a place that's over 50%, from what I was told, doesn't have running water. Like, can you imagine going every day and like that's just not a norm for that kid? So your situation is not normal. It's not common, but it is for them, and you have to learn to exist in that.
Right.
And kids just don't know until you teach them. And a lot of times we say about X's and O's, right? Don't take for granted that your kids know what power is, or cover three, or apexing, or force. But you have to understand that we took a kid in, and my first year coaching, and he didn't know that brushing his teeth was normal. that wasn't normal for him. He had no idea what dental hygiene really was a thing. We had to like buy him a toothbrush and then make him put it in his backpack if he went on a weekend trip to go see someone. Like, you
Mhm.
got to take this. It becomes, as important as anything else you carry with you. So being clean, washing clothes, and normal is different for everyone. And so when you start dealing with these situations with parents, and that's why I say never, and don't paint yourselves in corners, because
Mhm.
you may build a rule book that fits normal situations. Someone's going to break it, and then you may not even pay the consequence. It may be a kid, it may be their whole family. You never know. So just, I mean, we could go on. We could be
Well,
very
the fewer
philosophical
rules,
here.
the better. I would say that for 100% with what Daniel's saying. The fewer rules you can make, the better, because then you got some flexibility. You know.
Yep. Next question here, Kenny. Maybe hopefully not as deep here. Although I'm okay with being,
Yeah.
kind of deep, man. The world exists, and we got to be able to deal with it. How do you deal with coaches that are not on the same page? So we often preach, just about every episode I've ever recorded in podcasting and even in coaching meetings, unity, right? We come together on Sunday. That's the game plan. We leave. It doesn't matter if you disagreed when you went in the office. It's a unified front when you exit. But we've all seen people that that's not the case. So how do you deal with those coaches that just simply aren't on the same page as you in any aspect of ball and coaching?
Yeah, that's in my opinion, that's the hardest part from going from assistant to a head coach. These other issues we've mentioned, you're going to deal with all of those as a coach or as a teacher. I mean, those are real issues for anybody to deal with. Parent issues obviously will follow the head coach, but then this one is specific to being a head coach. So until you're in that room, you don't really know exactly how that goes, and it's tough because we want to think every coach is like us. Like we want to assume every assistant coach is thinking like we are. But here's the reality. I mean, Daniel, you're going to walk into this in a couple of years. You're going to walk into a job and you're going to inherit some random group of guys that you're going to have to hope is going to get on board with what you're going to do. I want to be the bearer of bad news. They're not. Like some of them will, some of them will leave, and some of them you're going to have to assist in leaving because that's just kind of unfortunately the nature of being a head coach and trying to change. Because most of the time, if you became a head coach, not all the time. Sometimes if you inherited a good job, that's great. But most of the time, your first job as a head coach is not a good job. Like it's you got there because of a reason. It wasn't going well. If it was going well, they probably would have just hired from within. So I'm talking about guys that are coming into new. You're into a new situation. It's your first situation or relatively new. Most of the time, that's not a good situation, and you're brought in to fix it. So that I hope that kind of explains a little bit. But so knowing you're walking into that, the assumption there on my end is you're going to have to do some cleanup with those coaches. And that doesn't mean you got to get rid of all of them because some of them may get on board with you. But what do you do? And the question you asked is what do you do with the ones that aren't? And so there's a lot of ways to handle that. And I'm going to just kind of speak as frankly as I can. You need to make their life miserable so they leave. And I don't know how else to say that in a nice way. There's probably a more politically correct way of saying that. But if they don't want to do what you need them to do, you need to make them hate their job every day so they leave. And I don't know what that needs to look like. I've had some stories and I've done some things to kind of assist in that, like documenting and giving them jobs that I knew they weren't going to like. And I know that's probably manipulative and mean or whatever it is. But if you're not going to get on board with what we're going to do, you got to go. And that's just kind of the way it has to be. And unfortunately, depending on your situation, your state, that can be more complicated. That could be if it's
Right.
a volunteer assistant, that's no big deal. Hey, dude, we don't see eye to eye. See you. No big deal. But you may be dealing with a guy who's a history teacher at the school, and he's going to run you down all over town when you get rid of him. And so that's where it becomes a little more complex. So first thing I would try to do in those worlds is see if I can get them to buy into what we're doing. So we're going to give them every opportunity in the world to buy into our vision. And there are tools you can do to help in that. Like give them some autonomy in areas where they really, I don't mean to say don't matter, but that don't matter. Like areas where you can kind of give them some freedom and leeway where they really can't mess that up, like picking out the uniform or helping you with going to meet with whoever it is or whatever it might be. There's some areas in there where you can kind of give it to them. So you can give them some kind of things to help them maybe buy into what you're doing. And if that goes well, give them a little more. And that goes well, give them a little bit more. So that's one thing you can do. You can ask their opinion. That's the first thing I ask from every coach. When I walk into a new job is I shut up and ask them what they think and let them just talk. And so the fact that you will value what they think and you're willing to give them a fresh start, I think can help. So give them some autonomy, value what they think, give them the opportunity. I've been really big on my staff, so giving guys the chance to work up. Like if we have a job that comes open and we have a guy on our staff, he's going to get first shot at it. If that's a job you want, we want to promote from within. And I make that very clear up front. That's kind of what we want. So there's opportunity here for you to move up. Or if you are already at the top of being an assistant, then I'll make phone calls to help you move up to being a head coach somewhere else. So I do care for them and I do want what's best for them. Because again, my tiers were players or team, individual player, coaching staff before everybody else. So I care for them. So those are the things you got to do on the front end. But your question was, what do you do if they don't want to buy in? And the answer is very simple. You have to get rid of them. Like you can't just put them down in junior high and hope because they're going to ruin that. You can't just put them over here. You can't work with people you don't trust. So first thing you want to do is try to win them over, try to get them on board, give them a fresh start. But second thing is if that doesn't work and it doesn't work quickly, you got to get rid of them.
Looking at this from the assistant's point of view or coordinator or whatever, I've been in this situation as the guy who wouldn't get on board because I could see it was a faulty system, right? And sometimes you have to, once again, as a head coach, might look in the mirror and be like, am I bringing the best to the table? We talked about, a little bit earlier, you putting in the effort. Is your package what makes the most sense for your kids? If you are and there's nothing wrong with this system, but if you're an air raid all the time guy, but you don't have a quarterback and you've got one kid that can maybe play receiver, maybe running air raid ain't best, right? And if you aren't willing to change that system as a head coach and just make your kids successful, then this is probably going to be something that happens to you. Now, as an assistant, the best job or the best way to do it is just leave. I'm unfortunately dealt with a little bit of this past year. As a DC, I found out that a coach on staff was telling players to do the opposite of what I say of a play call. Every play call, every night of the game, right? Or every play of the game. And it's like I didn't know this for 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm pulling my hair out and screaming at kids, not screaming at kids, but like having to have conversations with them, like why are you doing that when I clearly stated this? And it comes back that, there was someone on staff that was literally telling them do the opposite of whatever he says. That's manipulative. That's and I don't even think that's what you meant, Coach, is making their job
No.
horrible. I'll tell you what, that made me question even just going back to work the next day. Like, why would I continue coaching in that system if I'm being set up to fail? So, as an assistant, number one, you got to figure out, is the fit going to work for you?
Mm-hmm.
Is that unified front something that breaks your moral code, right? Whatever your morals or ethics or whatever it is that makes you the good guy you think you are. We're all the main character in our own story. So is this going to break your moral code to follow along and get them footsteps? We talk about it in the military all the time. There's toxic leaders out there, and blindly following along just because they have more rank than you is not the correct response. So number one, see if it's that. Now, if you go out and they have a complete plan and it makes sense and it's just not the way you want to do it, get on board or get off board, get off the train. So, and Kenny, you kind of said it there. You need the head coach, got to get rid of them. Assistant coach, you guys to go.
Well, and you notice, like, Daniel, I don't think in my answer I even brought up scheme. Like, I don't ever judge a coach on scheme, but I like you mentioned, and I'll say this: there's times you come in and it's a good assistant and you're a good head coach, and it's not a fit. and that's okay. Like that's not the end of the world. Even I'll
Yep.
go to where it's Easter, so I'll even go to Bible here. You have Paul and John Mark who are like apostles for Jesus, and they disagreed so much they split up, and they still spread Jesus' word everywhere, but they did it differently because they couldn't see eye to eye. Both of them are good people. It just wasn't a good fit. You see that in the
Right.
Bible. Like so, there's times where maybe, like you mentioned, maybe it's not a good fit. You're a good guy, he's a good guy, but it ain't what it needs to be. So I think those are conversations that adults should be able to have. Unfortunately, they tend to they tend to not have them, and then have them with people outside that room.
Right. Last one here, I think, Coach. And we've saved the best for last because everything we've stated thus far, we're assuming that the administration supports you in your decisions and is going to help you to be successful with making those decisions. And you talked about getting rid of a coach is hard sometimes, so you need administration support. Talked about parents and you walking out of a meeting with admin. I bet they supported you. They had to, or if you were in a fight with them already, you're probably not walking out of that meeting,
Right.
right? So what do we do when we don't have that admin support or when we have issues with admin?
That's tough. Start on the front end of it. So, like, I think a lot of times as coaches, you go into interviews and you're so excited about getting a job that you don't interview the people that are interviewing you. You don't do your background research on them. Like every job I've ever put in for, I've called the coach that left. Like I've called the coach that left, putting in for this job, and that coach could be super bitter. So you got to kind of take it for what it's worth, but you need to hear the other side of the story before you walk into a job. And so, because there are bad admins, there's a lot of them. I read a quote once where it said, coaches can win games, but admin wins championships because the culture that the admin sets and the resources they're willing to put in to your program will determine a lot of things you can do. There are some, and you need to understand, where does football fit in their world? Is football an activity that they just want you to do good enough and keep kids out of trouble and stay out of their way? Is football something they recognize as drives a lot of the culture of the school? And is football a place that they're going to give you some leeway to do things that you want to do? So those are things you need to ask on the front end. Like, what do you expect from your football program? What do you hope we can do? What are you willing to give to help us get where we want to go? Those are questions you need to ask because they always ask you at the end of the interview, do you have any questions for us? Well, I just gave you 3. Then the next one is, what's my salary? So that's the next one. So there's 4. All right. You need to ask those questions. However, I'm assuming doing this question here, Daniel, we're talking about a guy who's already got a job, and now you're like, here we go. So number one, let's go back to what I mentioned about admin. What's the only thing admin think about? Liability. They think about
Yep.
liability and getting sued. And that's the number one thing they think about. So you need to understand, you need to start thinking like them too. Like if you're going to get fired, think about all the really good coaches that got fired because some incident in the locker room, or some incident with a wet bulb, or some incident where you put your hands on a kid, or some incident where whatever it was, where that's what they're going to watch. So you need to make sure that you are communicating how you're handling those situations with them on the front end. How are we handling locker room duty? How are we handling bus sign out duty? How are we handling our practice schedule with the heat? How are we handling our parent meetings? And all that stuff is usually sent on a group email to all my coaches, and it's CC'd the main admin that need to know. So they're aware on the front end, here's what we're doing. Here's our schedule we're sending out to all our parents and players. Here's our meeting agenda. Here's our this. So they're copied along the way. Second thing you can do to help with admin is you call them about an issue that you hope doesn't get to them. Like you used to kind of hope, well, I hope that doesn't go up there. It's going to get to them. So if you did something dumb, said something dumb, or an assistant said something dumb, or a player said something dumb, I would call your supervisor ahead of time and say, here's what happened. Here's what we've done. And kind of, you may not hear anything about this, but if you do, here's what happened. Here's why it happened. Here's what we've done to correct said issue, whatever that might be. And you'll find that will help you a lot if you can kind of get ahead of things. Because what they don't like is a parent walking into them and they're in an indefensible situation. Like they don't have any idea the background of it. They're going to come in there anyway, but they have no idea the background of, you know, assistant coach, Coach Chamberlain cussed at so and so. It's inappropriate. We really can't defend that. But did we tell you the background where your son had his hands on him and was trying to push him, and Daniel was getting him off him? So you need to give them all the background information there. It doesn't make it right, but at least gives them something to kind of defend themselves with. You need
Right.
to preemptively give them all your liability type stuff you're doing on the front end. And then ultimately, if there are bad admin out there and you're not going to be successful working under those people. So I would recommend if you've done all these things, you've tried to correct it, because here's the deal. If you're doing all these things and they're still against you, you're not going to be able to be successful there. Like it's not going to be a place you can be successful. You're not going to be happy. You're not going to be successful. Daniel mentioned earlier, the assistant coach, that's the time where you kind of cut your ties and you kind of move on. But there are things a lot of times as coaches, we get mad at admin. It's really our fault. Like I can't believe the admin is such a whatever. Well, you had a kid vaping in the locker room. Like that's not the admin's fault. That's your fault. And so what are you doing to kind of correct some of those issues? Or, we had whatever the issue was. Half the time you're mad at admin, and this is me, half the time I'm mad at admin is because I didn't do my job and I'm mad they called me out for it. So let's be
Yep.
honest. You're being honest. It's a lot of times as a head coach, you're kind of the big dog. No one tells you what to do. Well, they do, and so you don't like that when they tell you. So you have to ask yourself those questions: Is this reasonable? Am I doing something wrong here, or is this them having unreasonable expectations for me? Usually, it's a mixture of the two. Maybe you didn't do something you should have done really well. Maybe they didn't handle it real well. And so those are questions you got to ask before you just say, man, we have a bad admin. Well, hang on. Let's kind of walk through the situations here and see how you ended up in this mess. And then I think the last thing you can do is have that conversation with them of, I want to be here. My family wants to be here. I feel like you don't want me here. Is there something I'm doing that I can fix? And we need to have an open, honest conversation there. And I've always just told mine, I said, you'll never have to fire me. Just come tell me you don't want me there, and I'll leave. So there needs to be that open line of communication where it's okay for you to rip me if I do something stupid. I'm fine with that. That's just part of life. But I need to know that you still want me here. You still believe in what we're doing. And so those are conversations that have to happen.
Yep. From the assistant coach side, this is where this is the ultimate refer to my head coach. You should not have dealings with admin. There is the chain of command for a reason. That head coach has too many things on the line for you to be buddy with the admin. And it doesn't matter good or bad, right? It should come from the head coach. There's going to be situations where you have a very selfish head coach and they're going to take all the credit for all the things. It's not time for you to go boasting about yourself and ensuring the spotlight's on the right person. Let him have it and figure out where you're going next. I'll tell you one funny thing. Can you talk about not letting your admin be blindsided? A couple of years ago, I'm in the military. Okay, I've got a potty mouth. I cuss way too much. I've tried to curb it over the years, and generally I can just put myself in, like at grandma's house, I don't cuss, so I can just be like, okay, I'm at grandma's house and I'm all right. But sometimes it comes out anyway. I was at the top of the bleachers in a press box calling a game. They kick an onside kick, and we have a defensive end on the front line of our kickoff return. It's not a planned onside kick. It's a surprise, and he watches it stumble to his feet or roll and sits there and looks at it, and they fall on it. And I dropped the biggest, loudest F-bomb I think I've ever let go. And immediately I was like, that was not smart, right? A parent even came up and was like, you guys got to watch your mouths. I was like, man, I get it, right? Like, okay, yes, we do.
Yeah.
It was a windowless press box too. Can we just talk about, as a school, can you please put windows on the press boxes? Okay. And an air conditioner. It's August. We're we're coaching up there. It's hot. Put windows. They don't need to hear us. Anyway, I immediately at halftime walked down, found my athletic director, and was like, this is what just happened. I apologize. It wasn't it wasn't meant, and it was my crowd. It was my home team crowd. So it wasn't even like it was behind the enemy lines, right? But I just let him know, like, look, dude, I screwed up. I know it. I apologize. I went and told the head coach, and I still got non-renewed for basically that same thing. Now, there was more to it, and I was still upset because I could be, but realistically, I know that I gave them the ammo there
Mm-hmm.
to let me go, right? And that's just part of it. Like you got to. You talked about think like admin. You can't give them the ammo to fire you with due cause, and I definitely did. But still, I knew it was coming. You're not going to save your job. That parent was going to the admin no matter what. Even if they wouldn't have come and told me, somebody would have told the admin. So just don't let them be blindsided. Bad news does not get better with time. It gets worse.
Yeah, it does.
After it's gone around Facebook about 10 times, I would have cussed out a kid who I called up there off the sideline, right? And then it would have been a big thing, and none of that really happened. So, yeah, don't let bad news age, man. It's never good. All right, we've gone through a ton of things today. So this is a super special what not to do as a coach. So, Coach, what is our lesson for the day?
All right, so lesson on what not to do as a coach is don't try to be the coach you think other people want. And that sounds weird. I'm not suggesting you don't listen to what other people think or don't make smart decisions, but I think it's important that you are true to the coach you want to be. Like there is a time you may get fired. It probably will if you're in it long enough. You never want it to be on their terms, not your terms. So a lot of times as a coach, you go in, you're a head coach, you feel the pressure, and guys, if you haven't been there yet, it's just a level of pressure that just until you've been in that position, it's hard to explain it. It's hard to explain. And I know, Daniel, you're in the military, so I'm not even going to compare it to that. That's a whole new level. But it feels as though you're walking around and you never can relax. Everybody's eyes are on you. Everything is on you. And so a lot of times you'll morph into what you think people want instead of just being who you are, who they hired you to be. And there's nothing more sickening, I think, than if you do that and still get fired. Like you might as well be who you want to be, be the person you told them you were going to be when they hired you. And then if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. And again, I kind of go back to our rules. If we're trying to do our best for our team and our kids, and then kids come first, and then coaches come second, and that gets me fired, I can sleep at night. I'm fine with that. But if I'm starting to make decisions based off, I get that order mixed up on what do I think my admin wants, what do I think these people with money want, and kids are down here at the bottom, man, I don't know if I could justify it to my conscience. And so I think a lot of times my suggestion to you is don't try to be a coach you think everybody else wants you to be. Be the coach you think you need to be. And then just kind of let the chips fall where they may.
Absolutely. Awesome. One last time, we mentioned those sponsors that we got. Ace Sports. Talk to Mark and Ryan. The cheat code of all fundraisers. I had about a 30-minute phone call with Ryan the other day because he's the Oklahoma rep, and I'm working with some Oklahoma schools to try to help them get the advantage in fundraising. And, he told me, look, man, the boards can be expensive. Okay. You're in that $200,000 to $400,000 window for like the average size. And that's a lot of money. But he told me most teams are in the black within the first year.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't owe a payment until that year is over. That first year is up. You're going to be in the black before you ever owe them a payment.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have the money. So think about that, guys. Reach out to Mark. He's the one that's got the contact on there. Let him know what your situation is. He talked to me at your camp or your clinic, Kenny, and he said that they put it in a 1A Arkansas school. So there's no school too small. There's no school too big. If you're big enough, I guess you just get the super fancy stuff. And it's not just football. Go any sport. You can go baseball. You can go basketball. He showed me some really cool pictures, some new gymnasiums they're putting stuff up in. It looks like the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? Like you're going to an NBA game and it's your local high school game. And think of everything you can attract with that, just a video board. You can attract a lot of attention, a lot of good, positive things can come to your community. So reach out to those guys. And of course, Zach Welchman over at Procom, let him handle all your headset needs. Once again, you want to talk about the O-Line Academy, Coach?
Yeah, it'll be coming out here next month or so, or within this next month. So Should have I got 4 or 5 really, really good guest speakers going to be in there. Coach Gould, sleeveless Coach Bo Gould will be in there. So it's going to have about 20 hours of content. I have a book that goes with it. I think it's going to be about $100 for all of it. So it's going to be a pretty good little deal.
Gun Show Gould. That's got to be his name.
That's right.
Make it happen. Social media, you can find me on X/Twitter at Coach Chambo OK. Email me, chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. You guys listened last week. That was a coach that lives near me. He's been listening to both podcasts for a long time and said, I want to be on the show. He emailed me. I know we brought something to the table. We had him on, okay? So if you're a guy that wants to come on, we'd love guests, especially in the off season when scheduling's not so much of a thing. We're not worried about practice and games, and Kenny and I are going to be stressed to get those. Just like last year, we got to squeeze in those episodes somewhere. But right now is the best time for you. If you want to be on a podcast, guys, it's a ton of fun to sit and talk ball. You lose the jitters. Don't worry about the imposter syndrome. That goes away too. Just come on and talk ball with us, man. Reach out to me at chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. Kenny, where you at?
All things FB Coach Simpson. So fbcoachsimpson.com. It's got headsets. Don't forget, Daniel's got a whole series running. Be worth watching over there. It's also got all the gun tee, all the 3-4, all the team themes. There's just a bunch of stuff over there. fbcoachsimpson.com or Twitter at fbcoachsimpson or fbcoachsimpson@gmail.com is my email address.
Perfect. Appreciate that. Podcast at Coaching 101 Pod on Twitter. You can check us out there to see what stuff's kind of just dropping. We want to thank you for being a listener to the Coaching 101 podcast. We'll hope you'll join us next week as we continue to make the complex more simple. Please consider subscribing to the show so you'll always know when the new episodes are out. We'll leave you with this. It's hard to beat someone who never gives up. No matter the situation, find a way.